welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. This is a continuation of my series on debunking the doomer. And I'm going to go into how I became a doomer and how I stopped becoming a doomer. And I think it would provide a lot of context onto how people get trapped in this mindset. The first real thing when it comes to the doomer mindset is, I think a lot of it is just being a casualty of bad economic cyclical timing. I think millennials and Gen Zers have been more likely to be doomers because they grew up with their formative memories coming in times of economic hardship, whereas their childhoods were in times of economic prosperity. My childhood was primarily in the 1990s and early 2000s. The 1990s were the most prosperous time really in the economy in the post-World War II era. And given that I grew up in a relative golden age when things kind of mean reverted, it was a little bit jarring. And I was in college during 2008, and seeing a lot of that in my formative years, both in my education and my early career, created a doomer bent because you had such a long extended period of economic hardship and high unemployment and rents rising faster than wages. I mean, from 2000 to 2016, real wages fell pretty hard across most levels of education and skill. And then you had a very high stretch of unemployment from 2008 to 2013 as well, which didn't help matters. And so a lot of younger people were behind on their careers and resentful and were not achieving at the same level as their parents. And then meanwhile, you had a bunch of policies designed to keep asset prices, particularly real estate prices, inflated, which priced a lot of people out of real estate, which also created a lot of resentment. Also, a lot of these younger generations have a lot more childhood trauma than previous generations at similar levels of socioeconomic status. Like somebody born in a middle class or higher in the 50s or 60s probably did not have the same degree of trauma that somebody in a similar socioeconomic status does today, whether it's due to increased levels of bullying in schools, whether it's due to harassment through social media from peers, whether it's due to college admissions processes becoming extremely competitive and becoming like the end-all be-all for a lot of the career fates or perceived career fates for a lot of upper middle class young people who grew up in the 2000s. I went to high school and college in that time. You also have a higher rate of parents being divorced during people's formative years, which also will cloud somebody's mind to more of a doomer bent. So you have the combination of the casualty of economic cycles and just an increased level of personal trauma than people from otherwise economically comfortable backgrounds got in their early life. It's created a lot of doomer mentality. And also, I think on top of that, you have things such as social media that create this false expectation that people's lives are perfect, or that if you don't have your life perfect, like go ahead and read some of the self-improvement platitudes on Twitter if you don't believe me. That if you're not perfectly emotionally stable and wealthy and in the best shape and yada 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 by a certain age, you're a loser. And people, I think even though it is kind of that everyone has a trophy culture to a certain degree, there's also people have also gotten a lot more rejection too, as a higher percentage of their life than in previous generations. Just basic things such as making a sports team in high school, or getting into a good college, or finding a good quality job. It's always more competitive for the echo boom people born, say, between 1982 and 95, millennials, because this was like the peak of baby boomers having their kids, and so and it also had a more generous immigration policy during this time. So just all of life became more competitive, and a lot more people slipped through the cracks that otherwise wouldn't have, and it kind of harbors doomer mentality. I mean, I was, again, in college during 2008. I saw a lot of people lose their livelihoods in the real estate bubble, whether through their investments in property or in the financial markets. The media promoted a bunch of doomsdayers like the Peter Schiffs and the Gerald Celentes, etc. of the world, and their narrative was persuasive to me because I saw a lot of this breakdown happening around me, and I had seen a lot of people who had been otherwise fairly responsible have their careers and their net worths and assets destroyed and never really recovered, and they still haven't recovered 10 years later. And there's probably a lot of people who saw that and they're like, hey, wait, like, things do not get perpetually better. Look at this. And if you zoom back far enough in history, in the pre-modern capitalism era, it was just a cycle of toil and mean reversion. And you had any gains that were basically taken away by either a war, or famine, or plague, or revolution. And that was a common thing before modern technology kind of helped alleviate a lot of that. And so if you have like the super long view, like the centuries long view, the doomer was right for most of human history. And I talked about this in my old money videos, that living standards really didn't go anywhere until about 1750 in human history. And if you look at just the shorter term, which was a lot of these doomers' formative years, say like 2007 to 2013, you had an extended period of pain, which colored the doomer view. And these doomers' predictions looked a lot more reasonable in a bear market of social mood. And then there's also the Great Social Depression, which I did another video about how even as the economy and material standards have improved, people's social health has declined, and they take their personal, emotional, and social distress and translate that to a negative outlook on the world. So what got me out of the doomer phase? Honestly, what got me out of the doomer phase is just living long enough to see a lot of the doomer claims not happen. I wish I could say there was some sort of magical trick I learned or a few classes of therapy that would fix all of this, or that like once I started, say, making more money in my career, I'd become less doomer. But that's not entirely true. It won't help you become less doomer, because you always realize, one, there's somebody who's doing better than you, and you'll use that as your new benchmark to be doomer. And two, you'll say, like, maybe I was the fortunate one who managed to get out of it, but I see what's going on in the news and the world, and most people aren't fortunate, and there's more people slipping through the cracks, and therefore the doomers are correct. So I think it's really the only solution, unfortunately, to my younger viewers here, and maybe you just have a faster learning curve than I did, or are a little bit less skeptical, is to, or maybe not, or hopeful, or maybe more skeptical of the doomer narrative than I was at the same age, is time. Like, I saw all these predictions about, say, like certain catastrophes happening to the climate by 2020, or that living standards would be at a certain level by 2020, like, such as, or the national debt would bankrupt America, Social Security would run out of money by 2021, that was a common one. Or the U.S. would be a third world country in living standards by 2016. Or Florida would be underwater by 2016. The San Francisco Bay Area would be flooded by 2020. You would have World War III by 2020. Like, I saw a lot of these claims. The stock market would be at S&P 400 by 2017. A lot of these claims by what I thought were reputable people, a lot of them actually had good track records in their careers and in trading, whether it's professional investors or other ventures they did. They were not dumb people who were making these doomer claims. And now that like a lot of those years have passed, it's like I really first became a doomer in high school, like 05, 06. I was mainly concerned just like seeing housing prices going up as fast as they were, and that like I'd be stuck living in some middle of nowhere rural area because it would cost way too much for me to ever live in a place I wanted to live on a normal job. And so I started to get this doomer mentality from the housing bubble of all things. And the bust temporarily relieved that for me until I saw a lot of this doomer propaganda and certain political biases that I had at that time kind of made me a little bit more doomer. I mean, I still have similar political biases, but the point being is that I've learned to split those away from a doomer ideology. Like the other ones, the claims of things like gold prices going through the roof and peak oil, and the thing is that none of it happened. And I'm going to go into the facts of what did happen with this. We did not run out of natural resources. This is 2022. I mean, I thought if we had 2, if not 3 major recessions really since I started thinking about doomer stuff in the mid-2000s, and record levels of money printing, and you had supposedly a lot of crises politically, economically, socially between now and then, the world hasn't ended and the economic opportunity has not completely collapsed. Living standards have not fallen. In fact, they have risen. The US dollar has not fallen since then. In fact, it has risen. I mentioned in one of my disclaimer videos that, yeah, certain countries, your doomerism makes sense. Like if you were a doomer in Venezuela, congratulations, you were spot on. But on the aggregate for the world is in better shape than it was in 2007. Particularly in the United States, for a variety of reasons. And by just seeing time pass and a lot of these doomer predictions just simply not happen, and in fact, a lot of things on the economic side, in fact, improving, and this can be proven either through financial markets pricing in better outcomes, or just the data coming out and dispelling the previous doomer claims, I just became less doomer from seeing it. And you can't really, I guess this may be tough to substitute for experience, but I'm going to try to educate in the rest of these videos my audience about how maybe the doomers are wrong and what are the things that I've seen that have led me to that conclusion. Thanks for watching.